I'm delighted to welcome you all here to our offices for this information session, which is a real collaboration between all the local agencies here in Monaghan. We've all been working together to provide information and support to all volunteers who have come together to support children and families coming to Monaghan seeking refuge. The Department of Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth asked CCCs to coordinate the response locally for Ukrainian children and their families and have provided some funding towards this. And I have to say, the response here in Monaghan has been phenomenal. We discovered that many of the local agencies were already working on developing supports for the Ukrainian families, and you'll hear from them briefly in a moment. So before we begin, I'd like to say a thank you in particular to all the childcare managers and practitioners who are here. Despite all the challenges they face in terms of workloads and staffing, they never cease to row in and help when needed. And they've all agreed to give their time as volunteers for the stay and play sessions. Also a word of thanks to the staff of Monaghan County Childcare for all their work this morning, preparing the lovely refreshments, which I hope you've enjoyed, and the packs, with the information sections from all the agencies involved. So on behalf of the working group, which includes Monaghan County Childcare, Imelda Graham, NCN, SIPSI and Kathleen from Life Start, you're all very welcome. Our main guest presenter is Imelda Graham, who all of you involved in childcare will certainly be familiar with from her publications. And Imelda has also worked with children who have experienced war and has worked in refugee camps. So she's an awful lot of expertise to bring to today's session. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Colette from SIPSI to say a few words. And thanks again, we really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colette Deeney and I'm the SIPSI coordinator for County Monaghan. And I suppose Jennifer has talked about the way that we all came together as agencies. SIPSI has a role in interagency and collaborative working. So myself and Breda and Jennifer, we would have got in contact with the National Childhood Network. We have a fantastic amount of expertise within the county. And then with Imelda's fantastic, I suppose, experience in working with children in camps in Lesbos, an island off Greece, with refugee children from Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. It was fantastic to have her input to the programme and to the stay and play sessions. So we formed a steering group to look at providing stay and play sessions for Ukrainian refugee families in a variety of supported sessions. Jennifer, of course, has been in touch with you, and we were absolutely blown away with the volunteers that came forward to say that they would give their time to support and facilitate the sessions for families. So where the sessions will happen. In Monaghan, we have some existing parent and toddler groups, which could possibly act as a really good way to help new families from the Ukraine to come along and join into activities. For example, the hub in Chocknadini meet there, and they're supported through the Beacon Family Support group. So perhaps if you had a room in your own childcare facility, you might be able to give 1 or 2 hours a week, or if there was a community centre, or if there are a group of refugees possibly staying in an accommodation centre, we may have to bring the play and stay sessions to them. So it's a kind of a moving piece of work at the minute, and we're just kind of seeing where the families are and where we need to go to support them. So Michelle is going to bring us through what an actual session would look like and what the stay and play sessions are. But we also wanted to talk to you about where the resources will come from. So Jennifer has mentioned that we have got through SIPSI and through the county childcare committees. We've gotten a budget from the Department of Children Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth towards providing some resources for the families. So we hope to set up a library where we'll be able to lend out resources for the stay and play. We hope to have some wheelie suitcases. We'll have different themes. So we might have one on small worlds, one on sensory, treasure basket play, so that it's easily accessible and that you can come in and pick up your suitcase and then be ready for your stay and play session. You also may have some resources that's in your own facility that you might be able to use, because it will be kind of a lending back and forth. So that's the plan at the moment. We also have some funding through the TUSA Parental Participation Seed Fund. And through that, myself and Charlene Duff, who's the Senior Network Coordinator, we hope to set up some toy libraries. So if you can imagine, like, just leaving what the families have had to go through and then leaving the country with absolutely nothing, we thought rather than kind of start from scratch, we would set up libraries where parents could possibly come, the children could pick out a toy, bring it home with them, rather than, I suppose, constantly doing up packs. It's not sustainable. That's, we thought the toy library was the better option to go for that. So we're still working through the finer details of the resources, the list. We're getting there. We have a good list compiled now. But we did think it was really important to have volunteers and, I suppose, to be mobilised and have information and training before we actually starting to roll out the sessions within the community. And I'm delighted to have the support from all the agencies here involved. I also wanted to thank the volunteers for coming forward. It's not easy, and I know you're all the most hardworking group of people in the county. I come from a background in that myself, so know exactly how hard you all work. And then just to highlight that we're working closely with the Monaghan County Council, who are coordinating the local community response committee, and also to let you know that Chocknadini Family Resource Centre and Monaghan Integrated Development are our two community contact centres within Monaghan for support with Ukrainian families. So I'd now like to hand over to Michelle Hart, who will explain the stay and play sessions. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Hart and I'm actually the incoming CEO of the National Childhood Network. I'm delighted to see you all here today. The stay and play sessions are really sessions that provide high quality play for children and families, and that's why it's very important that people with backgrounds in early years are there to support parents, children and families, particularly when they've been through a very difficult time. The stay and play sessions are there to provide things like bonding and attachment and interactions, which obviously you are very good at modelling, and to support families in seeing play as a vehicle for learning, to tap into children's learning and development in different ways, holistically, through different areas of play that you will be providing. And as Colette said, there will be different trolleys and different items of play that children will be able to access. There will be, I suppose, the sessions are there to support independence and social interaction, but also for parents to be able to talk to each other, and to provide a good support network for them as well. As part of your role will be to ensure that these sessions are fun, because we know that play is part of our healing and recovery for children who are suffering maybe from trauma, which is ongoing, and also to provide signposting and information and advice to parents where needed. So that's just basically basically what the sessions are for. And in relation to what they look like, if you could imagine a smaller version of your settings where there's physical play, there's physical play for babies, toddlers and preschool. There could be a quiet area for book reading, there's arts, there's lots of different maybe equipment for building and construction around loose parts and things like that, and things, therapeutic things like sand and water and Play-Doh. So lots of just different things that you would already be doing every day in your own setting. So it won't be anything new for you, but for some of these children and some parents, they might not have had access to some of the play that you are providing. So it provides a good opportunity for the children and families to experience a wide range of play. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to introduce you now to Imelda Graham, and she's going to take you through some aspects of the stay and play sessions.
Hello everybody, thank you Colette and Jennifer and Michelle, thank you very much. And I have mixed feelings about this because, I said to some of the group when we started this, I said, it's so sad that I'm having to go back and revisit all the work and bring all that knowledge. And it's good that I have it, but it's sad that I have to bring it. And to say that the work is not always easy. So we'll deal with some of the more challenging aspects of it and also how you can look after yourselves, because I think that's really important. Now, I think I'm going to start by showing you a short clip. Are any of you familiar with Suzanne Zidek?
Yes.
Yeah, and the trauma and attachment. And this is, just watch this little clip of her, hold on, go back to her glasses. Better glasses, hold on. Just go back to this now, and this is the moment when this Welsh lady is greeting a mother and child that are coming. And I'm going to take you through all the key attachment moments and relational moments that are in it, just to heighten our awareness of how every gesture and every movement can be important. Okay, so that's just the short video, and I'm going to move down now and take her. If any of you don't, if you follow her on Twitter, she's fantastic because she does these threads of analysing second by second what the children are experiencing, what the adults are experiencing. So I think it's worthwhile just to kind of get us into the frame. So we only know with this family what we've been told in the tweet, that they're arriving in Wales from the conflict and they're being welcomed at the airport. We don't know if they're complete strangers. We don't know what traumas they have. We don't know. But there is kindness. And the kindness is just personified in that Welsh lady waiting there. So we begin the story. I'm just going to read out quickly. It's not very long. And this is sort of like once upon a time, this lady was waiting at the airport for this family to arrive. And she is just standing there and she is waiting and watching. Now, she has some other links there to storytelling, which is fantastic. But this is the big moment when the woman she's waiting, she gasps and she sees the family coming out to her. And you can see her whole body changing. You can see that sort of movement coming in her body and the feeling going right down, the emotion going right down in her body. So she waves enthusiastically at 5 seconds. It not only locates for the family, but it's classic. It's a universal symbol all over the world that you wave at somebody. And she's leaning forward. If you watch it carefully, she's just leaning forward slightly. And she's just so excited. She's waving her hand and she's moving her whole body. She really is feeling the emotion and intensely. And she's doing something called self-soothing. And you see people doing this. We all need to self-soothe ourselves when there's big stuff happening in our lives. And we do it some way. Some of us do it maybe in unconscious movements. She's doing it that way. And she's just calming herself a little bit. And then she's running over and holding out her arms. And she's just, can you imagine how that woman coming through the door, how she feels? Sorry. So the family are coming through and they are going to be hypervigilant. And I think it's worthwhile pointing that out. So families come into your sessions. This is a new thing for them. They might be a little bit vigilant at the idea of something new, some new concepts. Perhaps they play differently with their children. These, as Michelle was saying, there'll be new ideas brought in. So just having all those things in our head and that awareness, I think, is really important. And here they are. So she hugs the woman and the mum welcomes and her eyes are closed, we think, so that signals trust. I'm safe now. I can let my body relax for a moment. And then this next moment is lovely, because the little guy runs around to look at his mother's face, to see, is this safe? And I think that's, definitely, they're the kind of little seconds that we might miss very easily. And I think it's lovely to see it. So by the time she turns around to the little boy, she's still holding on to the mum and everything's being juggled at the same time. So he steps back. And that's really valuable because it lets his mother do something important. His mother puts out her hand to him and just reassures him with her hand. And she knows that he's, maybe got little anxieties about this. And the woman does what we all know is the best way to do it. She gets down to his level, but she waits back and she lets him move to her rather than forcing herself on him or just exploding all over him, you know. So he is the first to wave. He signals the greeting. Have they pre-planned this, he and his mum? Probably not. This is his way of trusting. And we can see her affirming him. She waves back to him and she adds the word that goes with it and says hi. He offers the hug. She lets him step into the new space between them. And, you know, I will talk about sensitive communication, and this is just such an important thing to do, especially for families who are perhaps, you know, in a very, as I said, hypervigilant state. So maybe they met digitally, which I hadn't noticed before, but that's interesting that they might have had contact over a video call or whatever. And I think this this lovely moment where she knelt at the ground and left the space between them, and that's really, really important. So the two adults share the joy of this. The woman looks up and she connects back with the mother again. And then there's a whole load of stuff there. She gives lovely links in these threads to other work that's being done about sharing attention and eye gazing and everything. It's really useful stuff for anybody doing research on this. So as the hug ends, she's, as I said, she connects still with the mother. She's still connected with him. Her physically, her hands are there. And then she asks him if he wants to be carried, possibly. And she lifts him up, and then he's willing to let her, which is fantastic. You know, the trust, and he gives the consent. And then there's a big moment in a welcome, and he starts sharing things with her. So he has actually been made to feel welcome. He is accepted. He is building that level of trust with her. And he shows her something in the airport. And what does she do? She shares it with him, and she looks at it too. And then she does something else, and she shows it to the mother. So they're all, the three of them are brought together in this moment. So it's just, I think what this brings home is the idea of those little interactions when people come into you and you just, or maybe caught up in welcoming the parent, but the child. So all of these things, it's just to have those awareness. And I just think it was a very, very good example. And they all walk off together. So I think that's, I just thought it was worth sharing that. I thought it was just really gives you that awareness of how to deal with people that are perhaps in this challenging situation. Okay, so we go back to this and we'll go to slideshow. Okay, so as I said, as the other said, I worked in Greece for a couple of years. I just, the whole thing was overwhelming, and I had the opportunity, and I raised fundraising, and people were fantastic. I think people around here were fantastic and supported me, and I went out there. I paid my own way, which was a fantastic thing, because we got attacked a lot by fascists and accused of coming and taking Greek jobs and keeping this and being paid. Because some, I won't get too political, but some agencies were paying a lot of money to staff to go out there, and the locals resented it, obviously. And this man and his wife accosted me at the airport one time, and it's just, really, you coming out here, you're not listening to us. And I said, no, I paid my own way. So it was actually a good thing. But what I'm going to look at is the context, and we briefly look at ACE's adverse childhood experiences, which I think is something we've all become much more aware of in the last couple of years, and we're learning more and more about them. And then I'm going to talk about the actual work with refugees and the idea of play, sensitive communication, joint decision making, and sort of that idea of the power balance. And then trauma-informed practice, emotional triggers and responses. I've got a couple of case studies of examples of things, because as I said, it's not easy work. You know, it might roll along very nicely for weeks and everything's settling in nicely, and then something will happen, and you will, you know, it can be quite challenging for the people working. So I have got a section on self-care for volunteers, and then we look at some questions and answers. So just adverse experiences, just to get your head into the headset. That picture, I had so many to choose from, but that picture was done by children of crossing in a boat and some of the people in the boat sinking, which is still happening, by the way. So the children have been dispossessed of their homes, often violently, and they don't choose to leave these homes. They're being bombed out of them, which is awful. I'll tell you a little story about a young girl I had, and 3 homes she was bombed from. They've been witness to torture, murder, and the violence of war. I mean, some of the sites that they may have seen, may be just awful, absolutely awful, you know, whether it's people being blown apart or there's been rape and there's been various other activities and awful actions. So they've experienced transitions, often hazardous. I mean, some of them we know walked from their homes across Ukraine and walked into places like Poland and Belarus. Some of them would have been able to fly, perhaps. Some of them would have gone on buses or whatever. So refugee children have the odds stacked against them in their daily lives. You've got, when you think of Bronfenbrenner and think of that model of the child at the heart of it, and the whole idea of the family around them, and then the wider and the wider and the wider systems around them, it's stacked against them. They've language barriers, there's cultural changes, and totally different way of behaving and being, and different landscape and different transport. Everything is different. And as I heard in the news this morning, some of them being moved 15 hours notice. And I appreciate that it's challenging to fit them into hotels and to accommodation, but 15 hours notice, you know, it's not. They need to be prepared for that. Some of the children may have disabilities. There may be communal living. They're going to have to get used to in some of the hotels, and you may be going into those situations where they might be working they might be staying in centres or hotels locally, and they are moving in with strange families, and that's a challenge for everybody, and it's quite hard to manage. And maybe for the younger children, this is what they're familiar with. They you know, the children who are, say, if you're having 2-year-olds, they won't really have a huge memory. This is going on now nearly 3 months already. So that's a huge chunk out of their lives. So their memories of earlier times are going to be limited. So, you know, that's a challenge in itself. I think a key thing to remember is that the children may seem fine, but they may live with adults who are severely traumatised themselves. Quite a lot of the parents could have PTSD, and the carers who are with them. And I think one thing that's worth remembering is that the trauma may be ongoing, because obviously some of these families are here and they've left family behind them in the conflict zone, and they're going to be perhaps anxious and worried and hearing bad news from home. So I think that's really worthwhile remembering. So I want you to just briefly turn to the people beside you and just discuss this. And this is when somebody has experienced forced migration, especially with the trauma situations, they may find it difficult to express their lack of consent to people in authority. How do they say no? How do they say no to people who've offered them safety, shelter, food, and are looking after their basic needs? So just turn to the people beside you and just have a quick word. Yeah, Jen, if you want to share. Just, you know, how they're in a position. What I'm talking about here is the power imbalance. Okay, I'll anybody want to share any thoughts on it?
I suppose we're just saying, Imelda, you know, even in any walk of life, if somebody's been kind to you and given, it's very difficult, isn't it?
It's really difficult.
Yeah,
it's
because you
usually
think that
difficult.
it's very disrespectful or, you know, not very grateful.
Yeah.
But I suppose that's really important for us to realise the way we offer support.
Yeah.
That there is a choice, and that, you know, that has to be very clear.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I'd like to get across. And we do collaborate. I mean, listening to that radio discussion this morning about the families being asked to move, they weren't given a choice. I think what could be put in place is a simple mechanism to say, you're here in this place temporarily, or maybe some of them are doing this, you're here temporarily, you may be moved at short notice because we don't have any other choice at the moment, but at least they could prepare. I mean, the children get into school uniforms and having to take them off and not be able to tell their friends they were going, the new friends, you know, it's too hard. So I've put in a page, I found a lovely thread from a lady with experience of this, and I've put it in a page at the end of your handouts, and I've just taken one piece out of it, and just this idea of, where's this going? How would that click? Oh yeah, and I've just taken one sample, and this is about taking photographs. You know, when I did work in the camp, people were clicking all over, and we separated out people who were really there to help the people and the people who were there perhaps with a slightly more narcissistic or selfish viewpoint, and they insisted on taking pictures with the refugees, and that was, we just banned all pictures with the children. That was it, full stop, unless we really knew ourselves. And you really do need to be aware of that power structure, because you've got the familiarity, you've got the confidence, whereas they're unsure, they're uncertain. I mean, that woman in that airport with the Welsh lady, it depended on her to take her out and show her where to go and how to get through collect the baggage or whatever they had to do. So consent, collaboration, and giving them agency in their new lives is important, an important aspect of working with them, I think, for all of us. So play, you know about play, and Michelle has talked about play, so I'm just going to talk about it very, very, very briefly, and talk about my own experiences and what the children found really beneficial and helpful. So child-led, freely chosen, best quality kinds of play, open-ended play. Art, Play-Doh, sand and water, outdoor play. I put in links to some of the Bernarda's leaflets. There's one on outdoor play, there's one on the transition, there's one on the trauma-informed practice, which are really useful. And other equipment can be offered, and fun. I mean, Michelle, it's fun. And for the parents to see the child and to share that with you and with their children, having fun. And we have mentioned about the play packs. And I just want to put in, this was... My first, talk about flexible play, my first experience, I was given the old Medicine Sans Frontières tent, which wasn't being used, and I was allowed to have that, and that was a fairly rough and ready place to be in. But I got mats, and I got sort of tablecloths and spread them on the floor, and I got water. I got a couple of that basin and two of those giant basins and balanced them on stools, and we had the water play. And that was fantastic. They do, they always love that. It just is a calming, it regulates their everything in the children, in their emotions. And paint was another thing that was very popular. It's just to see her hands. I'll show you what she painted in a moment. But if you can imagine a place about this size of this room, and I had about 12 children between the ages of 2 and 12, and we had there was kind of an old laundry metal cage in the corner, and we got a piece of blockboard and we put it up, and we pegged flip chart pages to it. That was our painting board, because we didn't have one. And I got some of those little things just there for the colour. And this little girl, Lubna, she came in and she was 11. She was one of the older ones, and she just made a beeline for the paint, and she just wouldn't let anybody else near it. And that's what she painted the first time. And I just said to her, did she want to tell me about the picture? And she said, yeah, that was my garden back in Iraq. That was my garden. And I got to know them very well, became very friendly with the family, and they're terrific people. But that was her thing, that was her garden. And we actually went out a few weeks later and we bought plants for everybody. So they all were able to plant things around they were in kind of chalets and tents. So we were able to do that with them. And then the most popular thing for all the age groups by a long shot was Play-Doh. I made Play-Doh till it was coming out here. And it was just the most popular thing for them. Everybody, different ages. That's a couple of older children, obviously, making kind of a birthday celebration with stuff. We had Play-Doh. One of the volunteers who came down to help from Ireland, Kathy, she introduced me to the joy of Play-Doh made with conditioner. Have you ever done that?
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's really soft. It's expensive. So when I was in the supermarket, watch out for special offers, because it was lovely. It was really silky and very, very sort of...
Mr. Price, or what do we have in Monaghan, Home Savers? Yeah, they sell those big...
Oh, do they?
containers.
Yeah. It's worth getting.
Yeah.
It's worth giving it a shot if you haven't done it before. How we're doing loads of time. We're great. So, short case study. This is about the little one I was telling you. She was bombed out of her home 3 times. She came with her mother and father and her little brother. And her name was Mariam, and her little brother was Wa'il. I had to get my head around all these different names, which was always a bit of a challenge for me, and take the time to get them right. It's worth taking the time. We talked about the relationships and building that connection. It's it's worth it. They can be difficult names, and some of the Ukrainian names are very Russian sounding and very strange in terms of our own experience. But it's worth taking the time to get that right, and they won't mind you getting once you're trying to get it right. They won't mind that at all. But this little girl took ages. So the children, when they were 6 and over, were able to go to school once they got vaccinated. And they in Greece, the school was quite not play-based really at all. But she didn't settle. She would avoid school as much as she could. She wanted to stay near her mother and father. And it took her ages, and she did go to school some days, but of course in summertime the school wasn't on. And I went home for a family thing, and for a couple of weeks, and another lady came in, and she put in place really strict routines about tidying up. And the link person in the camp, Rachel, thought this was fantastic, you know. I mean, we did all do the tidying up. This was a little bit more explicit, shall we say. It was fine, absolutely fine. But there were twins there, aged 11. This little girl was 7. And they overheard their parents talking about the fact that her mum, Nazarene, had developed cancer. And the twins, of course, thought this was a great thing to tell the little 7-year-old. And she came in, and when I say she trashed the place, well, we weren't expecting this. Do you know the way? And I was there on my own, and she just got everything, jigsaws, everything was being trashed. So I could have called a halt and said, break time, go out for break. And Rachel, the camp coordinator, came in and said, no, she has to tidy up. And I said, no, she was in her head. She was totally distressed, the child. And anyway, I took the children outside, we had our break, and I left Rachel with her, which I didn't want to do, but I really, not much choice. So anyway, I had it out with her afterwards and said to her that was really inappropriate. And she said, you're right. She said she couldn't hear me. And she couldn't. She was totally flooded with emotions. So be prepared for something to say. I mean, that's a bit more dramatic, but be prepared for a child for something to happen. Just be aware that if the child is communicating with you through their behaviour, and if there is something like that. I mean, years ago I worked on some of the traveller halting sites, and we did a little guy who used to come in, and he would do this a couple of times a week, and we sat and analysed his responses and his behaviour, and it was hunger. So when he'd come in the mornings before the other children, we'd give him a banana or something to eat. And I can tell you the dramatic improvement in his behaviour was fantastic. But this little girl, you know, we did have this discussion about it, but she was, you know, when children are flooded with emotion, they do not hear you. So just be prepared for children, for something that might set them off. It happens with any child. It doesn't have to be a refugee, child is a refugee, but and the parents as well. And trauma-informed practices, they recognise that children will respond differently. Some may be frozen. I mean, some children will just sit. That's actually what she did for a very long time. She wouldn't discuss or talk with others, but she would be quite frozen in herself. And some may act out. So just be aware of that. And there is the leaflet to read, and there's a few other resources that we've given you. And it's no harm, if you haven't done any work in this area as yet, it's no harm to familiarise yourself with this and to be quite understanding. I mean, there is the argument, going back, Rachel would have had the argument that you have to be consistent and that all the children have to tidy up before they go out. But there are times when you have to be flexible. Definitely, you know, when somebody is in a deep state of distress, and this was an exceptional event. So that was one. Any questions? Anybody wants to add anything or say anything? Have there any experience of children doing things like that? Nobody? That's okay. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, good Jennifer, thank you. I was going to say, yeah, we left some post-its there. If you have any thoughts or any queries or questions or things you'd like more information on, we maybe just jot them down on the post-its in your pack, and we can go back over those later, or you can leave them behind, and if you want more information sent on, leave your email or whatever. Okay, thanks. Right, so this is in your pack. I was going to ask you just to read it briefly. There's about 500 things in this to unpick, but we'll just look at a couple of things from the mother's point of view, the child's point of view, and the educator's point of view, okay? So Jennifer, maybe show them which page it's on. It's in your pack there. It's in the notes, Jennifer. It's in this page sheet. Yeah. You see it there? So I just have a read it, because I'll read it out to you, but just if you want to read it yourselves. Here's my glasses again.
On page 3, actually.
Page 3. So if you want to read along while I read it out, and then we just have just briefly register a few things in your head if any questions come to mind. This was a lady who came with her aunt and her niece and her 2 sons, and the older boy was 9, and he was great. He was just joined in with all the other children, and he played, and he was very relaxed actually. It was great. But the younger boy was nearly 5, and he had severe cerebral palsy. So his body was quite spastic, you know, in that kind of way, and his legs, and I'd say they had been travelling across the various countries a lot of the time on foot, and they'd been in refugee camps in Turkey, and he wouldn't have had opportunity to actually have any physical work done. I mean, that child would have needed massaging, and he would have needed a lot of work to loosen up his limbs. So she pushed him around all day in a buggy. That's all. She came to the camp. She had literacy issues. She had language issues. She was very uptight. And we had, when we went out for a break, we had a little outside space. And I used to see her going by every day. People were coming and going regularly. But she came, and she was there for a while, and she would just walk around every day with this little guy. And I'd start calling her in at break time, and she wouldn't come at first, but then she did. And, you know, I said to her, you know, come on in, and we brought him in, and she was worried about bringing him in his buggy, and we managed all of that anyway. And she started to share break time with us, and that was lovely. And we started to give him stuff. And he was so responsive. I mean, physically, he was quite restricted, but he was so responsive and lively. You could see it. He'd bursting with intelligence. So eventually, I took her inside because the ground was very rough, and he had a lot of physical limitations. So I took inside, and I cleared an area with one of those play mats with the traffic, you know, the traffic play mats, and I put all the cars and things around there. And I said to her, you know, sign language a lot of the time. You'll be doing that at first as well. Just to say that Colette provided some wonderful resources here. Sorry, I got that. Just with different language things, which I think are fantastic. But this, Fariba didn't have language, as I said, English at all, or Greek, and it was quite limited. But she saw what I wanted to do. So I told her to come and try him. So she came and sat beside him, and we took him out of the buggy and laid him on the floor, basically. He had to lie on the floor. And he moved around by one arm, scooched himself around with one arm, and it was break your heart to see it, really. But he was thrilled. He was thrilled, and he would just absolutely join in, and just the other kids were very accommodating with him, and I was a bit worried about that because some of the boys were very physical and very vigorous, but you know, they accommodated him, and they brought him over stuff, and he'd kind of grunt and you know, point at the things he wanted to play with, and they'd bring them to him, and then he'd move around himself. And it just was a huge success. I was really thrilled with it. We were trying to get him a proper pushchair for a disabled child. The nurse was trying to get him one of those. So all of that was really good. And she was able to leave him. You know, she was able to leave him and she'd get an hour's break. And she was, the thing I want to bring it to is how challenging it can be, because she started to relax. So they came one day in the summer, and she kept pulling at me, and she kept saying, you know, showing me her arm. And I gathered she wanted to tell me stuff. And she had the odd word at this stage. She'd been there a couple of months. And I kind of said, well, all the kids were there. So I had a couple of people there that day. So I took her out, and we went off to a space. And she started to tell me, and eventually it turned out that what had happened was I got the Farsi interpreter to help to translate. And it turned out what had happened. Her husband had gone missing, and he had he disappeared. And they came to find him, and they told her she was lying, and and they tortured her. And I mean, what they showed on her arms and her legs, and the torture marks and what they did to her, it was just awfully distressing, you know. But you have to kind of contain it, because it's her story and it's her pain. And one of the things in those leaflets is about not asking them about their stories. And that's really important. She was ready to share that with somebody. And so she did. And I found it was challenging. It is distressing, and I still think about her a lot. But the marks on her and the pointlessness of torturing this poor woman who, whose husband was possibly dead. So she just needed to be heard. So there's a lot in that little story is about the child and accommodating the special needs of the child, and accommodating the relationship development, and the other children's input was fantastic as well. But that thing of her coming to you, so you might come up against difficult situations, and we'll talk about sensitivity and communication. As I said, not asking about their circumstances. It may be that some of them will tell you eventually. You may never know what their real circumstances are, but that's fine. But be prepared just in case they do. And if it does happen, like with her, it was kind of out of the blue, and it was just the moment she was ready to share it, be prepared for that as well. And hopefully you will be able to have a reasonable ratio with people with you if you do need to have anything like that. And suggesting where further support is available. Now, I actually want to show you, I'm going to just escape out of this. These first 5 people have actually done a lovely, thanks to Colette producing this, they've produced a lovely leaflet. So we've printed out a couple of those. Yeah. So that going home checklist for yourselves at the end of the sessions, think about it. And think about one thing you found difficult, you let it go. And just follow the instructions there. I think it's a very good, simple checklist. I know when I worked with the camps, I would maybe half the time before I went home, I'd be thinking about all this processing stuff. And then I joined a choir. We had a joint Greek refugee choir, and that was the best thing. I'd go singing. It was lovely. And there's a thing in there about, there's another leaflet about team well-being. So I think those are really, really worthwhile having a read and keeping hold of them. So consider your own self-care is really important in this work. I think it's challenging, it's difficult, it's so rewarding. I mean, that little guy just crawling around on the floor, and just his face and his joy, you can't create moments like that. It's so good to see it. So, any questions? Anything else you want to ask, or anything I haven't covered or that you'd like to discuss? I've galloped through this. I mean, we could spend 3 hours doing stuff on reflection, on the power structure alone. You could spend 2 hours on that. So, anybody, any questions, or are you looking forward to it?
I suppose just to say that we'll all be there to help each other, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, we're all on call.
Nobody's going to be left on their own.
No.
In a vulnerable
I
situation.
think one of the things about that you said when you were in the Greek camps was how invaluable the play sessions were. That you had little kids and older kids in their teens who all enjoyed playing with Play-Doh and paint.
They were
And those
fantastic.
basic playgroup materials
Yeah.
that we've had for years.
I couldn't show some of the pictures, but I had this wonderful picture of a table. We had about 3 tables, one after the other, and there was all the children were doing the Play-Doh together. And they were sharing, give me a bit here, and it was just to watch the age group sharing and doing all that was rewarding. But one of the best things was the routine. I mean, I while you like child-led and all, we had all that, and we had the good environment created, and they had the routine, because a couple of people in the camp, because before I came and started that, the children were running wild, and while it's lovely for them to be outdoors and have lots of access to that, it was running wild. It really was, and people were so centred. We'd one father. I mentioned it in the leaflets or in the notes that he was suffering from PTSD. Quite a few men suffering from PTSD, and this man, he arrived, and we were near an airport, and a plane took off one day quite close, and he just threw himself on the ground, started screaming. And, he'd been exposed to that. I mean, it's so many challenging stories, and you're not going to be aware of them all, but just be aware that this is the way they are. But the routine was really important, that they had this 2.5, 3 hours every day that was theirs. And I remember Catherine O'Riordan came down from Cork. I don't know any of you know Catherine. Catherine's wonderful. And she just said, this is their time. This is what's for them. And it was fantastic. And I had one little guy that was having terrible rows with other children. And it turned out he was the only guy at that time spoke Farsi. All the other children spoke Arabic. And he was trying to befriend them all, etc. He was just a great little guy. But where they came from, so somebody from the UNICEF explained to me that quite a lot of the regions were... the culture in villages would be to throw stones. And when he would get distressed and upset, what would he do? Pick up stones and start throwing them. And I got accused of favouritism. I said, no, I'm just paying him the proper attention that he needs. He'd lost his mother. He was there with his father, who was a very troubled man, and his older sister. And they'd lost a brother on the route as well, who ran away from the father. We had to do a care order against the father in the end. But this little guy had a challenging life and couldn't make friends with the others and couldn't understand why he couldn't make friends with them. And he just would do this acting out thing. So it was just really to get on top of that. He was one of the more challenging ones in the beginning. And it was just everybody was kind of, oh God, Cedra did it. Oh, Cedra, it was that, the way a child gets labelled. Really can't stand that. And it was just really good to actually be able to bring him round. And the guy, the camp administrator, the camp buildings guy, whatever he was called, he was in charge of putting up all the stuff. He just said to me the difference even in 3 or 4 weeks of the children having the routine was amazing. So you might find that these sessions would be so valuable to the parents. And the parents, like that woman at the airport, she can sit and relax and sit and do it, if they want to join in, fine. If they want to just sit and enjoy the fact that their child is occupied with stuff and play and stuff that's really healing and good. And the paint, I think, is really good, and the sensory stuff, and the idea of sand, but especially Play-Doh. It might be a bit of a challenge if you're doing a flexible session once a week, but if you have services, maybe bring some of the Play-Doh back the next day or bring it in. So I don't know what your procedures are now post-COVID, but whatever they are, to work around something like that.